Oh, lighten up, Maeve. It was just a bit of fun. My sister's voice carried across the dining room, bright and lilting, like she was the only one in the room worth listening to, and in our family, she always had been. I was still standing at the end of the table, cheeks burning, holding a glass of white wine that had gone warm in my hand. 23 people, aunts and cousins, and my parents' oldest friends. Were doing that very Canadian thing of looking somewhere else, smiling too politely, pretending they hadn't just watched my most private feelings get read aloud like a punchline at my own celebration dinner. My boyfriend of 8 months, Donovan, was sitting directly across from me. He wasn't smiling. He was very, very still. My sister didn't notice. She was already laughing her way back to her seat, squeezing my mother's arm as she passed. My mother patted her hand. My father shook his head with a small, indulgent smile, the one he'd been perfecting for 36 years, whenever Celeste did something that should have warranted a real conversation, but somehow never did. What none of them saw, what I only understood much later, was that Donovan had quietly pushed back his chair and walked out of the room. Not in anger, in absolute, considered decision. Before I woke up the next morning, he had already driven 2 hours back to Kingston alone, and he had taken with him something that would unravel every careful lie my sister had ever constructed. But I need to start at the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My name is Maeve. I'm 32 years old, and I teach grade 4 at a public school in Ottawa's West End, a job I love with an embarrassing completeness that I have mostly stopped apologizing for. I wanted to be a teacher since I was small enough to line up my stuffed animals on the bed and quiz them on the provinces. My sister, Celeste, has found this reliably hilarious for about 25 years. She found most things about me reliably hilarious. Celeste is 36. She works in residential real estate development, drives a very clean Audi, and wears her mother's adoration like a second skin. At family dinners, she commandeered the conversation without effort. At Christmas, she arrived with the most expensive gifts and let you feel it. She was magnetic in the way that certain people are when they've grown up understanding, without ever being told, that the room was built for them. I was the other kind of child, quiet, watchful. The one who practiced tenets what to say in conversations hours before having them, who noticed every shift in tone at the dinner table, who learned early that the fastest way to avoid conflict in our house was to make yourself very small and very easy. There was a reason for this beyond personality. When I was 9, I'd entered a lip-sync competition at our school's winter talent show, something Celeste had dared me to do, egging me on for weeks, telling me I was good enough, that it would be fun. I believed her because she was my older sister and I wanted to. I stood on that gymnasium stage in front of 200 kids and parents, and the music started, and I froze completely. Couldn't move, couldn't remember anything. I stood there for 30 horrible seconds before I ran off the stage, and my sister, who was standing in the 3rd row, started laughing. Not a smothered laugh, a full, delighted laugh that a few of her friends picked up, because they always picked up whatever Celeste was doing. She told me later that she hadn't meant to laugh, that it had just come out, that I was too sensitive. My parents told me the same. I went to school the following Monday and endured a week of kids making frozen statue jokes whenever I walked past, and I never entered another performance of any kind for the next 7 years. This is relevant because of what came later. Celeste had built an entire file of me over the years. Every vulnerability I'd ever exposed, every moment of softness I'd been foolish enough to share. She collected these things the way some people collect grudges, except with Celeste they weren't stored in anger. They were stored lightly, casually, available when needed for entertainment. I tried in my early 30s to believe we'd moved past this. People grow up. Relationships shift. I'd been in therapy for 2 years by then, and I was doing the work. Learning to name what had happened, learning not to minimize it, trying to extend a kind of cautious good faith to the people in my family who I believed were at least capable of better. One February night, Celeste called me out of nowhere. She sounded different, quieter than usual, a little uncertain, like she'd had a hard week and wanted to talk. We spoke for almost 2 hours. I told her things I hadn't told anyone, that I still struggled with feeling like I didn't deserve my own life, that I measured myself constantly against some internal scale I couldn't seem to reset, that I sometimes woke up at 3 in the morning, convinced I'd been quietly fooling everyone, and it was only a matter of time before it caught up with me. Things I'd written in journals and said to my therapist, and never once planned to say to my sister. She listened. She said the right things. She told me she understood, that she hadn't always been fair to me, that she was proud of who I'd become. I believed her. I'm not ashamed that I believed her. She was my sister, and I was 31, and I was trying to be the kind of person who chose trust over old patterns. I should have known better. But at the time, I didn't, and that's simply what happened. In September, I found out I'd won the Ontario Minister's Award for Teaching Excellence. I want to explain what that meant, because it matters for everything that comes after. I'd been nominated by my principal, gone through 3 rounds of formal review, submitted a portfolio of student learning outcomes and teaching methodology and community partnership work, and waited 7 months to hear the result. When the call came, I was sitting in my car in the school parking lot after the end of the day. And I sat there for 5 full minutes after hanging up, not moving, while maple leaves came down on the windshield and the parking lot emptied around me. It was the most significant professional recognition I'd ever received. A small ceremony at Queen's Park, a grant toward classroom materials, a plaque with the provincial trillium that would go on my wall. But more than any of that, it was documented, formal, external confirmation that I was genuinely good at the thing I had chosen to do with my life. The kind of proof that you can't quietly minimize or spin into something else. My mother, to her credit, organized a dinner to celebrate. She called around, booked the private room at a restaurant in the Glebe, ordered a cake with the trillium in gold icing, invited 23 people. I was more touched than I expected to be. I let myself believe for a few weeks that this might be a different kind of moment between us. I also made a decision I'd been sitting with since the summer. I invited Donovan. We'd met at a pub trivia night in January. His team beat mine on a tiebreaker about Canadian prime ministers, specifically who served the shortest tenure. And I gave him so much grief about it that we ended up at a corner table talking until the bar closed. He was a structural engineer who worked on bridge infrastructure projects, soft-spoken in crowds and entirely himself in smaller rooms. He had a quality I find very rare. He listened like he actually meant it. Like the words coming out of your mouth were the most interesting thing in the space he was standing in. I hadn't introduced him to my family yet. I had my reasons, ingrained ones. But the award dinner felt different. It was my occasion, my ground, and I wanted him there. He drove up from Kingston on a Friday afternoon, brought flowers for my mother without being prompted, and wore a gray blazer that suggested he'd thought about it, but hadn't overthought it. At the restaurant, he was warm and easy, didn't try to dominate any conversations, and survived 45 minutes with my parents' most voluble family friends near the breadbasket, without a single visible flinch. My aunt pulled me aside before dessert and told me he seemed like a good one. I let myself agree. Celeste arrived 40 minutes late, which was usual. She made her circuit of the room efficiently. 2 cheek kisses for my mother, a handshake that became a half-hug for my father, a sweeping assessment of everyone else. When she reached Donovan, she turned on the particular brightness she reserved for people she was categorizing, said she'd heard so much about him, gave him a smile that held nothing behind it. He smiled back politely. I noticed that he didn't lean in. The dinner itself was lovely. My father toasted with an awkward warmth that was completely genuine. My mother cried a little, which I hadn't expected, and which caught in my throat more than I'd like to admit. My aunt said something about how she'd always known. A few family friends shared memories of me as a child that made the table laugh in a good way. And then Celeste stood up. She started well. She said she was proud of me. She said teaching was a noble calling. She said she knew how hard I'd worked and that the award was entirely deserved. I was looking at my plate because public praise does something to my nervous system that I have never fully resolved. And I was already feeling the familiar tightening in my chest from too much attention at once. I want to share something, Celeste said, because I think it shows what Maeve is really like on the inside. A couple of years ago, she texted me the most honest thing she's ever said to another person. I looked up. She said, and I remember this word for word, I feel like I'm constantly waiting for someone to figure out I'm not actually smart enough to be here. Like every good thing I have is on loan, and eventually someone's going to want it back. The room went completely quiet. Isn't that just the most Maeve thing you've ever heard? Celeste said, and laughed her warm, social laugh at a handful of people. Uncertain, following her cue the way people in a room always follow the person who seems most in control, made sounds that might have been polite chuckles. She wasn't done. She reached into her memory for a second message. Something I'd written about worrying, that I was too much for people to manage, that I expanded into spaces and didn't know when to stop. She called it adorable. She said this was why she loved her little sister, because she was so genuinely, refreshingly unaware of her own worth. She sat down to light, confused applause, and picked up her wine glass and did not look at me. My mother leaned toward me and whispered, "She means well. She's just trying to show people the real you." I picked up my fork. I arranged my face into something that could pass for fine. I ate dessert and said, "Thank you" when people said congratulations, and watched the dinner wind down from a remove. I couldn't quite close. When people started gathering coats, I slipped down the back hallway toward the restrooms and pressed myself against the wall and breathed. 2 minutes alone. Just 2 minutes. I heard Donovan's voice from around the corner. He was speaking quietly, but the hallway carried it clearly. "You read her private messages in front of her family and her colleagues," he said. Celeste gave a short, incredulous laugh. It was a toast. It was sweet. She was humiliated. She's always been like this. Too sensitive. You'll learn. A pause, and something in her voice shifted. Lighter, almost generous. Honestly, it's a bit of a pattern with her. You might as well know that now. Silence. Then, "I don't think I'm going to need the heads up," Donovan said. His voice had gone very flat and very calm. "Good night." I heard his footsteps move away down the hall. I did not move for a long time. He found me in the lobby a few minutes later. He didn't say anything monumental. He said, "Do you want to get out of here?" We walked 2 blocks to a Tim Hortons and sat in a corner booth. I ordered a medium double-double and didn't say anything for about 10 minutes, and he let me have those 10 minutes completely. When I finally started talking, it came out fragmented and too honest, the way things do when you've been holding them in a shape that doesn't fit. I apologized for the dinner. He said I had nothing to apologize for. And then, he said he needed to show me something, that he'd been trying to find the right moment for weeks. He put his phone on the table. Beginning in early October, right around the time I'd mentioned to Celeste that I was thinking of introducing him at the dinner, he had started receiving text messages from an unknown number. The messages said they were coming from someone close to me, someone who cared about me but thought he should know the truth. Before things got more serious, the messages described me as emotionally volatile, prone to depression, difficult in relationships, with a history of episodes that people in my life had learned to manage carefully. They said I had a pattern of leaning heavily on partners and then pulling away. They said that people who knew me best loved me, but found me exhausting. They said whoever was sending the messages didn't want to see him hurt. Donovan had not responded to a single one. He had saved every message, tried a reverse lookup on the number without success, and sat with it. Not because he believed it, he told me, But see, because he was trying to understand what kind of person would do this and whether I knew about it. After tonight, he wasn't waiting anymore. I read through every message in that booth. My hands were completely steady. Some cold, clarifying part of my brain had gone very quiet, the way it does when something enormous finally arrives in a form you can name. I recognized the phone number. 2 years ago, Celeste had switched to a work mobile temporarily and asked me to use that number to reach her for a few weeks. She'd never told me when she changed back. I'd stored it in my contacts as Celeste Work and never thought about it again. She had used a number she gave me and forgot I had. I put the phone down. I looked at Donovan across the table. "I'm not unstable," I said. "I know," he said. "I figured that out fairly early." We stayed there for another hour. He drove back to Kingston just after midnight. Before he left, he told me he wanted to see me the following weekend. He said tonight hadn't changed anything between us except that he now had the complete picture. He said it simply, like it was a given. I went home alone and sat at my kitchen table and did not cry. I made tea and thought carefully about what I knew and what I still needed to find out. 3 days later, a collection letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from a financial services company I had never heard of. It was addressed to me. It referenced an unsecured personal line of credit opened in my name 14 months earlier. The account had been in collections for 60 days. The outstanding balance was $47,238. I had never opened a line of credit with that company. I had never borrowed $47,000. I didn't even know such a product existed under that institution's name. My first call was to the company. My second was to my bank. My third was to the Ottawa Police Service Financial Crimes Unit, where a patient investigator asked me methodical questions for 40 minutes and told me to gather everything I had and come in the following week. My social insurance number had been used on the application. The address provided was my parents' house, my childhood home in Canada, where Celeste had lived until 3 years ago and where she still spent most weekends. The security question answers. My mother's maiden name, the name of our childhood dog, the elementary school we'd both attended, were ones my sister had known since we were in single digits. I gathered everything, the collection notice, the application file the company sent when I formally requested it, the text screenshots from Donovan's phone, my own phone records showing the Celeste Work number, the chat logs from that February night, the ones she'd read from at the dinner, saved automatically to my backup in the cloud. I did not call my parents first. I thought about it. I ran the conversation in my head the way I always did. My mother saying there must be an explanation. My father saying not to jump to conclusions. Celeste crying, my parents moving instinctively toward her the way they always had, and me standing outside that circle, again, at 32, still trying to find the words to make what had happened to me legible in a room that had never been very interested in listening. I decided not to offer them the chance to rearrange the story before the facts were on paper. I went to the police station. I filed a formal report for identity fraud under Section 402.2 of the Criminal Code of Canada. I engaged a consumer protection lawyer, a focused, precise woman who reviewed the documents I brought and told me the evidentiary trail was cleaner than most cases she encountered. We had a strong foundation. My parents called the evening the investigation began. Celeste had clearly reached them first. My mother's voice was shaking. "Maeve, before you do anything else, please, just talk to your sister." "I've already done what needed to be done," I said. "This will destroy her." I held the phone and let that sit for a moment. I thought about 23 people watching my sister sort through my private pain for a laugh. I thought about 6 weeks of messages designed to convince Donovan I was too broken to love. I thought about $47,000 borrowed in my name, while I had been saving carefully on a teacher's salary, building something modest and careful and entirely my own. "She made choices," I said. "Those choices have consequences." My mother wept. My father came on the line and told me I was being vindictive, that families didn't handle things this way, that I would regret burning everything down. I said goodnight and ended the call. I learned later, through the legal process, what the money had actually been used for. A substantial portion had gone toward a deposit on a pre-construction condominium purchase Celeste had committed to when her own financing collapsed. She'd been too proud to walk away, too exposed to find another solution. The rest had covered gap expenses, while she waited on a commission that arrived far smaller than she'd projected. She had intended, I was told through formal channels, to repay it before I noticed. She had not repaid it. The brokerage she worked for initiated their own internal review when the police investigation became a matter of record. An agent under active investigation for fraud was a liability no firm was willing to absorb without process. She was placed on administrative leave within the month. Her partner of 2 years ended the relationship. I don't know the details, and I haven't sought them. My parents did not speak to me for several weeks. Then they had to, because the investigation required a statement from them regarding the personal information Celeste had accessed. My mother came to my apartment alone. She sat at my kitchen table and looked at me and said, "I don't understand how you could do this to her." I was very tired by then. I had been very tired for a very long time. "Mom," I said. "She took $47,000 in my name. She spent 6 weeks sending my boyfriend messages, telling him I was mentally unstable, so he would leave me before I could introduce him to the family. She stood up at my celebration dinner and read my private text messages to a room full of people and called it sweet." I looked at her steadily. "When do you ask what she did to me?" My mother looked at the table. She didn't answer. But she didn't get up either. She stayed for nearly an hour, and we talked, slowly with long silences in between, about things that had been accumulating for decades without ever being properly named. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a tearful reckoning or a turning point with a clean edge. But it was the first conversation I could remember where she couldn't smooth what had happened into a shape that protected Celeste, and left me holding everything else. My father took longer. He is still taking longer. That is his work to do, and I've stopped trying to do it for him. Celeste settled the debt through a civil agreement, a structured repayment plan tied to a formal admission that she had used my identity without authorization. My lawyer told me a trial was unlikely and financially slower. The settlement was the practical outcome. She will be repaying it for years. Her real estate license was reinstated under a probationary review I was not party to, though the career she'd built has not recovered to what it was. I don't monitor her situation. I don't need to. Donovan and I had dinner the weekend after I filed the report. I told him everything. The fraud, the full scope of it, the $47,000 and what it had been used for. He listened the same way he always listened. Afterward, he asked, "Are you okay?" Not, "Can you believe she did that?" Not, "Are you angry?" Just, "Are you okay?" I thought about it genuinely before I answered. "I think I'm getting there," I said. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine, and I let him. And that was enough for that evening. I accepted the Minister's Award in November at a small ceremony at Queen's Park in Toronto. I stood at the front of a reception room, in a green wrap dress I'd owned for 3 years and finally had a reason to wear, and I listened to someone at a podium, read out the things I'd done, and the reasons they mattered, and I let myself receive it. Not braced for it to be taken back, not already composing the internal footnotes, just there, in it present. My colleague Audra drove down with me and took a photo afterward. I look, in that photo, like someone standing on ground that is genuinely hers. I cut off contact with Celeste completely. No dramatic announcement, no final scene. I simply stopped responding, and I have not reached back out, and I don't intend to. Some days that feels like grief. Most days it feels like what it actually is. The ending of something that was always costing more than it gave. My mother and I are still working out what we are to each other without Celeste, as the axis Everything rotates around. It's slow. It asks more honesty from both of us than we've ever been comfortable with, and there are conversations we have to keep starting over because we haven't yet found the right language. I don't know what it looks like 5 years from now, but I no longer approach it from behind glass. I am in the room. I take up space there. I say the true thing when the true thing needs saying. I still teach grade 4. I still love it the same way I always have. There is a student in my class this year, a watchful, quiet girl who reads 2 grade levels above her age and sometimes looks at me from across the room like she is figuring out whether I can be trusted. And I understand her in a way I couldn't have, maybe, before I understood myself a little better. I take very good care of my credit now. And I have learned, in the slow and unglamorous way, that most real things are learned, that keeping the peace has never once been the same as being at peace. That staying quiet in a family that uses your silence against you is not generosity. It is a vacancy, and other people will fill it with whatever is most convenient for them. I am done offering that vacancy. For 32 years, I made myself smaller in rooms I belonged in, smoothed over things that should have had edges, handed the benefit of the doubt to people who had already spent it. I swallowed what happened and kept it down because that was the agreement I had somehow entered into without ever signing anything. Then my sister stood at my celebration dinner and read my most private pain aloud to make a room of people laugh, and tried to dismantle the one good relationship I'd built, and used my name to borrow money she never intended to face me about. And I stopped swallowing. I came up quiet this time. No scene, no speech. Just documentation and a lawyer and the simple leveling fact that what you do in the dark has a way of finding the light. Especially when you've handed the person you wronged your own phone number to do it with.